My husband and his diabolical mother-in-law celebrated my death after poisoning me for my $100 million inheritance, tossing me out like yesterday's trash. But they didn't count on one thing: I survived. The next day, I returned with a master plan to destroy them, and their nightmare was only beginning. My name is Evelyn, and for the longest time, I thought my life was perfect. I was married to Jake, a handsome and ambitious businessman, and we lived in a beautiful home in an affluent suburb of Chicago. To the outside world, I had everything: love, comfort, and security. But behind the closed doors of that house, my life was far from perfect. Jake and I had been married for 5 years. At first, he was everything I could have hoped for: caring, charming, and supportive. Things changed when my father passed away. Losing him was devastating. He was my rock, my biggest supporter. But even in my grief, I felt a glimmer of hope because he left me a $100 million inheritance. I thought it would be a safety net for our future, a way to honor his legacy. Little did I know, it would become the reason my life turned into a nightmare. It all began with Diane, Jake's mother. Diane was in her late 50s, a retired socialite who lived for appearances. She was always impeccably dressed, her smile polished but insincere. I'd always felt she didn't like me, but after my father's passing, her disdain became more obvious. She began spending more time at our house, under the guise of supporting us during a difficult time. But I knew better. Diane wasn't there to support me. She was there to meddle. I noticed small changes at first: Diane whispering to Jake, long conversations that would abruptly end when I entered the room. Jake became distant, snapping at me over trivial matters and questioning my decisions. It hurt, but I chalked it up to grief. I never imagined how deep Diane's manipulations ran. One evening, Diane sat me down in the kitchen. "Evelyn, dear," she began with a sickly sweet tone, "you need to think carefully about your inheritance. Jake and I just want what's best for you. Managing such a large sum can be overwhelming." Her words sounded kind, but her eyes told another story. She wanted control. I brushed her off, saying I had plans to work with my father's trusted financial advisor. Her smile faltered, and I saw a flash of anger. That's when I knew she wouldn't give up easily. A few weeks later, I started feeling unwell: nausea, dizziness, fatigue. At first, I thought it was stress or the grief catching up to me, but it kept getting worse. I noticed it was especially bad after meals. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the night that changed everything. I was in the dining room, finishing dinner with Jake and Diane. The food tasted off, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Moments later, the world started spinning. I felt my legs give way, and I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Diane's voice, cold and triumphant. "It's time." When I woke up, I wasn't in my house. I was lying on a park bench, my body weak and trembling. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Had Jake carried me here? Had Diane? Before I could make sense of it, a man's voice broke through my haze. "Miss, are you okay? Can you hear me?" I turned my head to see a kind face, a middle-aged man who looked genuinely concerned. I couldn't speak, but he didn't wait for an answer. He called 911 and stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. His kindness was a lifeline in that moment. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed my worst fears. There were traces of poison in my system. Someone had been poisoning me, and it wasn't a one-time thing. It had been happening over weeks. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut.
Diane, Jake,
They had done this to me.
but why?
The answer became clear when I overheard a conversation between two nurses outside my room. "She's lucky that man found her," one said. "They said she's got a $100 million inheritance. Makes you wonder who'd want her out of the picture." I felt sick, but not from the poison this time. It was from the betrayal. My husband, the man I loved, and his mother had tried to kill me. And for what? Money? Rage filled me, but so did determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I spent the next few days recovering, but I also began planning. Diane and Jake thought they'd gotten away with it, but they didn't realize I was still alive. I didn't know how I would fight back, but I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let them destroy me. And so, I started my journey, not just to reclaim my inheritance, but to reclaim my life. Little did they know, they had awakened a side of me they'd never seen before. This was far from over. When I left the hospital, I was physically weak, but mentally sharper than ever. I knew I couldn't return home to face Jake and Diane without a plan. They believed they had succeeded in getting rid of me, but I was alive, and that was my advantage. I found refuge in a small hotel a few miles away, using the cash I had on hand to pay for a room. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the betrayal washed over me again. Jake, the man I had vowed to love and honor, had thrown me away like I was nothing. And Diane, her greed knew no bounds. I was done crying. I needed answers, and I needed proof. The first thing I did was call my father's financial advisor, Mr. Stanton. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. "Evelyn," he said, relief evident in his voice when he picked up. "I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I admitted. "I think Jake and Diane are trying to steal my inheritance. Can you check if anything unusual has happened with my accounts?" "I'll look into it right away," he assured me. "Stay safe, Evelyn." A few hours later, Stanton called back, his voice grave. "Evelyn, there have been attempts to transfer funds from your accounts into a new trust under Diane's name. The documents claim you authorized it." My heart sank. I didn't. She forged my signature.
"I thought as much," he said.
"I've frozen all activity on your accounts, but you'll need to act fast. They're not going to stop." Hearing that Diane was already trying to steal what was mine lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting for justice. I decided to start by gathering evidence. If Diane and Jake had been bold enough to forge documents, they might have left other trails behind. I started with social media. Diane had always been careful about her image, but she underestimated the power of a digital footprint. I combed through her posts and found photos of her at lavish events, wearing expensive jewelry and designer clothes she hadn't owned before. Where had she gotten the money? And then there was Jake. His Instagram was filled with cryptic captions like, "The start of a new era," and "Bigger things ahead." My stomach churned at the thought that they were celebrating their plans to ruin me. But social media alone wouldn't be enough. I needed something stronger, something undeniable. I decided to go back to the house, knowing it was a risk. I waited until I knew Diane would be out. She had a standing lunch appointment with her bridge club every Tuesday. Jake would be at work. It was the perfect time. When I entered the house, the familiar scent hit me like a wave of nostalgia and pain. This had been my home, my safe place. Now it felt like enemy territory. I moved quickly, heading to Diane's room first. She kept a lockbox in her closet. I'd seen her put papers in there before. After a few tries, I found the key taped under a drawer. Inside, I hit the jackpot. There were forged documents with my name, copies of my bank statements, and even a handwritten note outlining Plan B if I didn't cooperate. The note mentioned the poison and how Jake would take care of things if I became suspicious. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just fraud. This was attempted murder. I took pictures of everything with my phone before putting it all back exactly as I found it. On my way out, I passed the dining room and froze. The chair where I had collapsed that night was still there, a stark reminder of how close I had come to dying. I felt a surge of anger and vowed to make them pay. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, staring at my phone. I had the evidence, but I needed to make sure it reached as many people as possible. That's when the idea hit me. Social media. Diane and Jake had spent years curating their image as the perfect family. What better way to shatter it than by exposing their true selves? I created a video, carefully piecing together everything I had. Photos of the forged documents, screenshots of their social media posts, and even my hospital records showing the poison in my system. I narrated the video myself, telling the world what had happened. "My name is Evelyn," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This is the story of how my husband and his mother tried to kill me for my inheritance." I hesitated before posting it, worried about the fallout. But then I thought of my father, how he had always told me to stand up for what was right. With a deep breath, I hit upload. The response was immediate. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments flooded in, some offering support, others expressing outrage at Jake and Diane. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly, the perfect facade they had built was crumbling. Diane's friends from her bridge club, Jake's business associates, even neighbors who had once idolized them, all were shocked. I watched it all unfold from my hotel room, a mix of satisfaction and fear swirling in my chest. This was only the beginning. Diane and Jake wouldn't take this lying down, but neither would I. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. They had tried to silence me, but now the whole world knew the truth. I wasn't going to stop until justice was served. This was my life, my inheritance, and my fight, and I was just getting started. The days after I uploaded the video felt like a whirlwind. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, offering their support. Others were from reporters asking for interviews, but I ignored them. I didn't need fame or publicity, I needed justice. As the world turned against Diane and Jake, I kept a close eye on their movements. From the little I could gather, Diane was furious, and Jake was panicking. They had underestimated me, and now they were scrambling to do damage control. A week later, I received an anonymous message through social media. "I have information about Diane," it read. Skeptical but curious, I responded. The sender turned out to be one of Diane's former friends from her bridge club. She told me that Diane had been borrowing money from everyone she knew, spinning lies about needing it for family emergencies. It was clear now how desperate Diane had been even before my father's inheritance became a target. This was another piece of the puzzle, and I stored the information carefully. My plan was coming together, but I still needed more. I wasn't just going to let them squirm. I wanted airtight evidence that would leave no room for doubt. One afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Stanton, my father's financial advisor. "Evelyn, I think I've found something you'll want to see," he said. "Diane has been working with a shady attorney to create new forged documents. They're trying to make it look like you willingly handed over control of your estate." I clenched my fists, my anger rising. "Can you get me copies of those documents?" "I already have," he replied. "I'll send them over." "Be careful, Evelyn. They're cornered, and that makes them dangerous." Dangerous was an understatement. Diane was already known for her fiery temper, and the public backlash had only made her more unhinged. She had lost friends, her social standing, and her polished reputation. Now, she was blaming me for her downfall, completely ignoring her own actions. I decided it was time to confront Diane directly. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about holding her accountable for everything she'd done. But I wasn't foolish enough to go in unprepared. I knew Diane's temper would be my greatest weapon. I reached out to her through Jake. "Tell your mother to meet me at the family estate," I said. "I want to discuss a settlement." Jake sounded wary but intrigued. "A settlement? You're finally coming to your senses." I bit back the urge to scream. "Let's just say I'm tired of fighting." He agreed to set up the meeting, clearly unaware that I had no intention of settling. Instead, I planned to record everything, hoping Diane would incriminate herself further. The estate, once my home, now felt like a battlefield. I arrived early and set up a hidden camera in the living room, positioning it to capture the entire space. My heart pounded as I waited for Diane. This confrontation could go terribly wrong, but I had to take the risk. When Diane arrived, she was seething. Her eyes burned with anger, and her voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, the prodigal daughter returns. What's this nonsense about a settlement?" I kept my voice steady. "Diane, we need to end this before it gets worse. Let's talk." She crossed her arms and smirked. "Talk? Oh, sweetheart, the time for talking is over. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to keep this family together? And for what? So you could play the victims?" I stayed calm, knowing she was walking straight into my trap. "You tried to kill me, Diane. How is that keeping the family together?" Her smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl. You don't understand anything. That money should have been ours. Jake deserved it, not you. You think you're some saint, but you're just as selfish as the rest of us. She was unraveling, and I let her continue. Jake and I did what we had to do. If you'd just handed over the inheritance like a good little wife, none of this would have happened. I stared at her, feigning shock.
So, you admit it?
You poisoned me? You forged those documents. Her face turned red, and she screamed, yes. And I'd do it again, if it meant getting rid of you. My hands trembled, but I held her gaze. Thank you for being honest, Diane. Before she could respond, I stood up and walked to the hidden camera, pulling it from its spot. Diane's eyes widened as realization dawned. What is that? I held it up, my heart racing.
Proof.
Proof that you and Jake tried to destroy me. This is going straight to the police and the court. Diane lunged at me, her nails digging into my arm. You littles. I pushed her off and stepped back, my voice steady.
You've lost, Diane.
It's over. She screamed in frustration, but I didn't stay to watch her tantrum. I walked out of the estate, the hidden camera clutched tightly in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, I reviewed the footage, my stomach churning at the venom in Diane's words. But I also felt a flicker of hope. This was the evidence I needed to finally take them down. Diane had revealed her true self, and now the world would see her for who she really was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prepared for the next battle, court. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. This wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. And I wasn't going to let Diane or Jake take that away from me ever again. The day of the trial arrived faster than I expected. I was nervous, but determined. Diane and Jake would be there, facing the consequences of their actions, and I was ready to expose their lies. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance, I was fighting for my dignity and my life. The courtroom was filled with tension. Diane sat beside Jake, her expression cold and defiant, while Jake avoided looking at me altogether. The once confident man I had married now seemed small and insignificant. It was strange to think I had ever loved him. My lawyer started with the recordings I had captured during my confrontation with Diane. The courtroom was silent as her voice echoed through the speakers, her venomous confession playing for everyone to hear. Yes, and I'd do it again, if it meant getting rid of you. Her words hung in the air, and I could see the judge's expression harden. Diane's lawyer tried to object, but it was clear they had no defense. The evidence was damning. Next came the forged documents. Mr. Stanton had testified earlier about Diane's attempts to transfer my inheritance into her name. He explained the forged signatures, the illegal transactions, and how he had managed to stop them just in time. The jury was visibly shocked as each piece of evidence stacked against Diane and Jake. When it was my turn to testify, I told my story, starting from the night I collapsed at the dining table. I described the betrayal, the poisoning, and the moment I realized the people I trusted most had plotted to end my life for money. My voice trembled at times, but I didn't hold back. This was my truth, and I wasn't going to let fear silence me. The prosecution presented the medical evidence, hospital reports confirming the poison in my system, and the timeline that matched Diane's presence in the house. The Good Samaritan who found me testified about how he had seen me unconscious and called for help. His sincerity was a stark contrast to Diane's cold demeanor. Then came the turning point. Diane took the stand, and it was clear she was unraveling. At first, she tried to play the victim, accusing me of being manipulative and stealing her family. But the prosecutor was relentless. He cornered her with the recordings, the forged documents, and her own web of lies. Under pressure, Diane lost her composure. I did what I had to do, she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. She didn't deserve that money. Jake and I... Her lawyer tried to stop her, but the damage was done. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and I felt a wave of relief. Diane's true colors were on full display, and there was no hiding now. Jake, on the other hand, was pathetic. When it was his turn to testify, he shifted blame onto Diane, claiming he had only gone along with her plan out of fear. I didn't know she would go that far, he stammered, avoiding eye contact with me. His cowardice was almost laughable. The trial lasted 2 weeks, but the verdict was worth every moment. Diane and Jake were found guilty of fraud, attempted murder, and forgery. The judge sentenced them to 10 years in prison. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served. But my story didn't end there. After the trial, I had a choice to make. Jake had written me a letter from prison, begging for forgiveness and asking me to wait for him. Diane, of course, had made no such gesture. Her pride wouldn't allow it. But I knew what I had to do. I filed for divorce. Jake had shown me his true colors, and I couldn't go back to the life I had before. My inheritance was secure, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my independence. I was no longer the naive woman who had let Diane and Jake control her life. Walking away from that chapter wasn't easy. I had loved Jake once, and part of me grieved for the life we could have had if he had been a better man. But I knew I deserved better. I deserved a life free from manipulation, greed, and betrayal. With Diane and Jake behind bars, their reputations destroyed, I began to rebuild. I used part of my inheritance to start a charity in my father's name, helping women escape toxic relationships and rebuild their lives. It felt like the perfect way to honor him and give back to others who needed a second chance. As for Diane and Jake, they faded into the background of my life. I heard through the grapevine that they struggled in prison, their once perfect image shattered. Diane, who had thrived on control and appearances, couldn't handle the reality of her situation. Jake, without his mother to guide him, floundered. I didn't revel in their downfall, but I didn't pity them either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. For me, it was enough to know that I had survived their schemes and come out stronger on the other side. Now, as I sit here telling my story, I feel a sense of peace. It wasn't easy to confront the people who tried to destroy me, but it was worth it. I learned that resilience isn't just about surviving. It's about standing up, speaking out, and reclaiming your power. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And that, more than anything, is the victory I hold on to. This was my story, and I reclaimed it with courage, dignity, and an unshakable sense of self-worth.
My name is Adeline, and at 42, I find myself living a life far removed from the carefree dreams of my youth. My days are a relentless cycle, split between my clerical job and the dwindling family liquor store, a once thriving establishment now teetering on the edge of ruin. The store, nestled in a cozy corner of our neighborhood, had been the pride of our family for decades. It was a time when our name was synonymous with quality spirits, and our monopoly in the area was unchallenged. But as years passed, strict regulations strangled the nightlife, and our primary clientele, hotel banquet halls, pubs, and restaurants, dwindled to a mere trickle. In the midst of this decline stood my father, Harold, a man stubbornly clinging to the past. His management style, if one could call it that, was a recipe for disaster. Debts mounted, yet he persisted with his outdated methods, blind to the changing world around him. 2 years ago, in a desperate bid to salvage what was left of our legacy, I moved back into my childhood home. The liquor store, struggling to stay afloat, became my evening haunt after office hours. Each day as I stepped through its doors, the familiar jingle of the bell was a stark reminder of the burden I shouldered. "Dad, are you drinking again?" I'd often find him behind the counter, a bottle in hand, his laughter a stark contrast to the store's empty aisles. "Ha ha, these bottles aren't selling anyway." "Might as well enjoy them," he'd slur, the smell of alcohol heavy in the air. I'd sigh, a mix of frustration and resignation, as I set about cleaning the cluttered store and delving into the books. Our finances were a labyrinth of debts and overdue bills, a testament to years of neglect. Dinner was always a solitary affair, long past 9 p.m., after the day's tasks were done. My parents, lost in their own world, would be asleep, leaving the kitchen and the responsibility of meals to me. Every night, I'd prepare a simple meal, usually instant ramen, and then start prepping for the next morning's breakfast. My mom preferred bread, while Dad was a rice person. It was a small detail, but in our household, even the smallest preferences were my responsibility. Weekends, which should have been my respite, began at the crack of dawn, thanks to my mother, Irene. "Adeline, make your father's miso soup quickly," she'd demand, her voice cutting through any hopes of rest. "Why can't you do that, Mom?" I'd protest, only to be met with her sharp retort. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here? Now get up." I had always been the meticulous one, the daughter who naturally took on chores and responsibilities. It started in high school, and by the time I graduated, I was the family's backbone. Tired of this endless cycle, I had taken up the office job right after school, hoping to escape. But escape, it seemed, was a luxury I couldn't afford. The liquor store's debts, a staggering $3 million, loomed over us like a dark cloud. Living frugally became second nature to me. $1 cosmetics, homemade lunches, enduring the cold to save on heating, all in a desperate bid to keep us afloat. One day, as I suggested leveraging the internet to boost sales, my father's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "Our old way is the best way. I'm not the problem, the world is." His words echoed in my head as I juggled household chores with my attempts to rejuvenate the business. There was never enough time, always a step behind, always just out of reach of a solution. But I was determined. Against my father's resistance, I started online classes, selling rare alcohol from our store. This innovative approach was a hit, especially with restrictions limiting people's movements. Slowly, the business picked up. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. But as our store's name gained online visibility, so too did my workload increase. Free time became a distant memory, yet I pushed on, believing it was all for the greater good. That belief, however, was about to be shattered. The rhythm of my life was an unending dance of duty and disappointment. Each day, I awoke to a world where my efforts seemed invisible to those who mattered most. My family's store, once a symbol of pride, had become a chain around my neck, dragging me down into an abyss of resentment and exhaustion. One particularly grueling evening, I found myself sifting through piles of overdue invoices, the numbers blurring before my eyes. The store was silent, save for the occasional clink of a bottle as my father, Harold, indulged in his habitual drinking. "Dad, we can't keep going like this. We're sinking," I said, my voice a mix of despair and frustration. He simply chuckled, his words slurred. "Ah, Adeline, always so serious. Relax, have a drink. It'll all work out." His nonchalance was like a slap in the face. How could he be so blind? The weight of our debts was crushing, and yet there he sat, drowning his sorrows in the very product that was supposed to be our salvation. The following morning, as I prepared breakfast, my mother, Irene, sauntered into the kitchen. "Make sure you clean the house today. Clara and her husband might visit," she ordered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara, my younger sister, was the polar opposite of me. Free-spirited, carefree, she had floated through life on a cloud of whims and desires, always landing softly on the cushion of our parents' support. Even after marrying a man as aimless as herself, she continued to lean on our parents financially. As I scrubbed and cleaned, the bitter thoughts churned in my mind. Why was I the one to bear all this? Why did Clara get to live a life of leisure while I toiled away? Later that day, as Clara breezed into the store, her laughter echoed mockingly off the walls. "Oh, Adeline, still stuck in this old place? You really should get out more," she chided, her words tinged with a carelessness that stung. I bit back a sharp retort, focusing instead on the task at hand. The store, now a little busier thanks to my online efforts, demanded my full attention. But Clara's words lingered, a painful reminder of the life I could have had. That night, as I lay in bed, the exhaustion of my double life weighed heavily on me. My parents' indifference, Clara's thoughtlessness, the endless cycle of work, it was all becoming too much. A voice inside me whispered of change, of breaking free, but fear and duty held me back. The next day brought no respite. As I balanced the accounts, my mother's voice cut through the quiet. "Adeline, when are you going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know." I looked up, stunned. Was this really what she worried about? Not our failing business, not the crushing debt, but my marital status? "Maybe when our store isn't on the brink of collapse," I replied curtly, turning back to my work. Her scoff was the only response I received. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to take its toll. Sleepless nights, skipped meals, and constant stress left me worn and weary. But there was no time to rest, no time to breathe. The store, the house, my job, they all demanded more of me than I had to give. It was during one of these endless days that I received the news. Clara was pregnant. The family buzzed with excitement, a stark contrast to the chaos that was our reality. "That's great, the first grandchild," I managed to say, a forced smile on my lips, but my mother's next words were like a cold splash of water. "That's why you need to leave the house." I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring within me. "What? Why?" "You need to make room for Clara and her family," my father added, his tone dismissive. I was speechless. After everything I had done, sacrificed, endured, this was how they repaid me? A cold, unceremonious dismissal? The injustice of it burned my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. But in that moment, something shifted within me. A resolve, steel and unwavering, took root. I would leave, but on my terms, and they would soon realize the true cost of their ingratitude. The decision to leave my childhood home, the epicenter of my lifelong sacrifices, didn't come easy. Yet, as I packed my belongings, each item I tucked away felt like a shard of the heavy chain I was shedding. The house, once a sanctuary of family memories, had morphed into a prison of ungrateful demands and unreciprocated toil. In the midst of my packing, my father Harold stumbled in, reeking of liquor. "What's this? Planning a little trip?" he sneered, his voice dripping with derision. I straightened up, meeting his bleary eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "I'm moving out," I stated, the words tasting like freedom. His reaction was a bitter laugh. "Moving out? And who's going to run the store? Cook and clean? You think you're irreplaceable?" His words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. "You'll have to figure that out, won't you?" I replied, turning back to my packing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Amidst the chaos of moving and handling my office work, I still found myself drawn back to the liquor store, the pull of responsibility too ingrained to ignore. One evening, as I was tidying up the store for what felt like the last time, Clara breezed in, her carefree demeanor unchanged. "So you're really leaving us, huh?" she asked, her voice light, almost mocking. I paused, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. "Yes, Clara, I am. Someone else can shoulder the burdens now." Her laughter was a cold echo in the empty store. "Oh, Adeline, always the martyr. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll manage without you." Her words, meant to belittle, only fueled the fire in my heart. My family's true colors were glaringly evident now, selfish, uncaring, and utterly blind to the sacrifices made in their name. The night before my departure, as I sat amidst boxes of my life, a sense of surreal calm enveloped me. The years of being the dependable daughter, the responsible sister, were coming to an end. But as I looked around the room, a wave of sadness hit me. This was the home where I grew up, where I laughed and cried, where I dreamed of a future that was never mine. My mother, Irene, appeared at my door, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Adeline. We need you here." Her words, so devoid of understanding, stung. "No, Mom, you needed me. You just never realized it." The day I left, the house was silent, an eerie testament to the void I was leaving behind. My parents stood by, their expressions a mix of confusion and resentment, as I loaded the last of my things into the car. As I drove away, the familiar streets of my childhood receded in the rearview mirror. I felt a pang of loss, but more than that, a burgeoning sense of relief. I was leaving behind a life of thankless servitude, stepping into a future where my worth wasn't measured by the sacrifices I made for others. But as the distance between me and my former life grew, so did my resolve. My family, so accustomed to my constant support, would soon face the harsh reality of their own making, and I, freed from their unappreciative grasp, would finally start living for myself. Settling into my new apartment, a modest but cozy space, I felt the first true breath of freedom I had experienced in years. It was a stark contrast to the burdensome atmosphere of my parents' house. Yet, even in this newfound tranquility, the echoes of my past life haunted me. It wasn't long before the reality of my family's dependence on me became painfully apparent. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from home. Each plea for help, each demand for my return, was a reminder of the suffocating expectations I had escaped. One evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone lit up with a familiar number. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my father, Harold, his voice slurred and angry. "Adeline, where are you? The store is a mess. We need you here," he barked into the phone. I clenched my jaw, the old feelings of obligation tugging at me. Dad, I've moved out. You and Clara will have to manage on your own. His response was a string of insults and accusations, blaming me for abandoning the family in their time of need. His words were like daggers, aimed to wound, but I had grown a shield of resolve. I'm not your crutch anymore, Dad. You'll have to stand on your own, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The days that followed were a relentless barrage of guilt trips and emotional blackmail. My mother, Irene, played her part well, lamenting how I could leave my family in such dire straits. You're being selfish, Adeline. Think about what you're doing to us, she implored during one of her many calls. But the years of neglect and underappreciation had hardened my heart. I've thought about it for far too long, Mom. Now, it's time for me to think about myself. Amidst this tumult, I found solace in my work and the few friends I had kept at a distance over the years. Among them was Marcus, a colleague from the office who had always been kind, but whom I had never allowed myself to get close to. One day, after a particularly grueling call with my mother, Marcus noticed my distress. Adeline, you okay? You've been looking really stressed lately, he said, his concern genuine. I hesitated, then decided to open up. It's just family stuff. I recently moved out, and they're not taking it well. Marcus listened intently, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. His kindness was a balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and understood. But the reprieve was short-lived. The stress of juggling my new life, the constant barrage from my family, and the lingering guilt took its toll. One day at work, as I sat at my desk, the room began to spin. The last thing I remember was Marcus's voice calling my name before everything went black. I awoke in a hospital bed, my head throbbing with pain. Marcus was there, his face etched with worry. You gave us quite a scare, Adeline. You collapsed and hit your head. How are you feeling? Tears welled up in my eyes, not from the pain, but from the overwhelming sense of care and concern I had been denied for so long. Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what to say. Marcus squeezed my hand gently. Don't say anything. Just focus on getting better. And maybe, when you're ready, think about making some changes. You can't keep going like this. His words resonated deep within me. For so long I had lived for others, neglecting my own well-being. It was time to make a change, to live for myself. As I lay in that hospital bed, the realization hit me hard. My family's selfishness and dependence had nearly broken me. But now, I was on the path to healing and self-discovery. And I was determined to not let anyone pull me back into the abyss from which I had just crawled out. Recovering from the incident at work, I found myself at a crossroads. Marcus's words echoed in my mind, urging me to change the trajectory of my life. It was time to prioritize my health and happiness over the never-ending demands of my family. The decision was made. I would no longer be at the beck and call of my parents and Clara. This newfound resolve, however, did not stop the onslaught of calls and messages, each more desperate and manipulative than the last. One evening, as I sifted through my mail, a call from my mother, Irene, came through. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic and anger. Adeline, you need to come back. The store is failing without you. We're struggling to keep up. Her plea was a twisted symphony of guilt and blame. You're responsible for this mess. You can't just abandon your family. I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a steely calm. No, Mom, I'm not responsible for the years of mismanagement and neglect. You and Dad made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. Her response was a mix of incredulous outrage and desperate bargaining, but I stood firm. The chains of guilt and obligation had been broken. As days turned into weeks, the frequency of their calls diminished, replaced by a foreboding silence. I immersed myself in my work and started exploring hobbies I had long neglected. Life was beginning to have a semblance of normalcy and peace. Then, one day, a call from Clara jolted me back to reality. Her voice was hysterical, a stark contrast to her usual carefree tone. Adeline, you have to help us. The store is on the brink of closure. We're drowning in debt. Her words were laced with panic and a hint of realization of the gravity of their situation. But it was too late. Clara, I warned you all. I can't fix years of mistakes and neglect. You need to figure it out, I replied, my voice void of the sympathy she sought. The call ended with Clara's sobs and pleas echoing in my ears, but they no longer had the power to sway me. My family had to face the consequences of their actions, the result of years of taking my efforts for granted. Weeks passed, and the inevitable news arrived. The family liquor store, once a cornerstone of our neighborhood, had closed its doors for good. The failure of the business was a harsh blow to my parents and Clara, a bitter taste of reality they had long avoided. I heard through mutual acquaintances about the chaos that ensued. My parents, unable to cope with their new reality, were consumed by blame and regret. Clara and her husband, faced with the harshness of responsibility, were at a loss, their illusory world shattered. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, seeing them finally reap what they had sown. But there was also a pang of sadness for what could have been if only they had appreciated and reciprocated my efforts. As I reflected on these events, I realized this was not just the end of the family business, but the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter filled with sacrifice and unacknowledged labor. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist of my own life. Life in my new world, unshackled from the chains of familial obligation, was a revelation. My days, once dictated by the whims and needs of my parents and Clara, were now my own. I relished the freedom, the ability to make decisions for myself without the cloud of guilt and manipulation that had hovered over me for so long. But even in this newfound paradise, the specter of my old life occasionally intruded. One day, as I was enjoying a quiet evening at home, my phone rang with an all-too-familiar number. The sight of it stirred a mix of irritation and curiosity. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my mother, Irene, her voice tinged with desperation. "Adeline, you have to come back. We're in trouble. The debt collectors are after us." Her plea, once capable of dragging me back into the mire, now fell on deaf ears. "Mom, I've told you before. I can't help you. You need to sort this out yourselves." "But we're your family. How can you abandon us like this?" she cried, the audacity of her words almost laughable. "Family?" I retorted, my voice cold. "The same family that took my efforts for granted, that kicked me out when I was no longer convenient? I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The line went dead, her silence more telling than any words could be. They were finally starting to understand the gravity of their situation, the consequences of their actions. Over the next few weeks, news of my family's plight trickled in through various channels. The once proud owners of the neighborhood liquor store were now pariahs, weighed down by debt and shunned by those they had once considered friends. My sister Clara, who had never known a day of hard work, was now facing the harsh realities of life. Her husband, equally inept at dealing with adversity, was no support. Their marriage, built on convenience and financial dependence, was crumbling under the strain. I heard about their heated arguments, their desperate attempts to find easy ways out, and their incessant blaming of each other for their downfall. It was a pitiful sight. Yet a part of me felt a sense of poetic justice. They were finally experiencing a fraction of the hardships I had endured for their sake. But it was during a chance encounter at a local cafe that the full extent of their decline became apparent. Seated at a corner table, I saw my parents, haggard and worn. They were arguing, their voices a mix of anger and despair. I watched unseen as they laid bare the years of mismanagement and selfish decisions that had led to their undoing. The sight was sobering. This was the family I had left behind, a family that had never valued me until I was gone. Their downfall was of their own making, a direct result of their actions and choices. As I left the cafe, a sense of closure washed over me. I had moved on, built a life where I was valued and appreciated. The echoes of my past, though still lingering, were just that, echoes. They no longer had the power to dictate my life or my happiness. The chapter of my life, defined by thankless sacrifice and unreciprocated loyalty, was closed. Ahead lay a path of self-discovery and fulfillment, a journey I was eager to embark on. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each passing moment affirming my decision to step away from the life that had once threatened to suffocate me. I had created a world for myself, a sanctuary where respect and self-care were not just ideals, but realities. In this new life, I found joy in the small things. The quiet mornings, the leisurely walks, the books I had always wanted to read but never had the time for. My job, once a mere escape from the chaos at home, now became a source of fulfillment and growth. It was during this period of tranquility that Marcus, my colleague who'd been a pillar of support, became more than just a friend. Our shared experiences at work and his unwavering kindness during my tumultuous times blossomed into a deep, meaningful relationship. One crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the park, Marcus stopped, his eyes locking with mine. "Adeline, you've changed so much since we first met. You're stronger, happier. I'm glad I've been a part of this journey with you." His words, simple yet profound, filled my heart. "Marcus, you've been my rock. I don't think I could have made it through without you." As we stood there, amidst the falling leaves, a profound sense of contentment enveloped me. I had come so far from the woman who lived only to serve the whims of her ungrateful family. However, the echoes of my past were not completely silenced. News about my family still reached me, each update a grim reminder of their continuous downward spiral. The once thriving liquor store was now a forgotten relic, its doors permanently shut. My parents, stripped of their pride and business, were a shadow of their former selves, embroiled in a never-ending cycle of blame and regret. Clara and her husband, having lost their financial safety net, were adrift in a sea of their own making. Their frivolous lifestyle, once sustained by my efforts, was now a distant memory. It was during one of my visits to the local market that I overheard a conversation about them. "Have you heard about the family that used to run the liquor store? It's a sad story. They lost everything, even their home," a woman said to her companion, shaking her head. "Yes, I heard. They say the daughter who used to do everything for them left and everything fell apart," the other replied, a tone of sympathy in her voice. I walked past them, a sense of vindication mixed with a tinge of sadness. My family had reaped what they sowed, a harsh lesson in the value of gratitude and hard work. But their fate was no longer my burden. I had released myself from the chains of their expectations and neglect. My life was now my own, a canvas on which I was free to paint my future. As I looked forward to my life with Marcus, a sense of hope and excitement filled me. We had plans, dreams to chase, a future to build together. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. In the end, the greatest revenge was not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the life I had built in spite of them. A life of happiness, love, and fulfillment, a life truly worth living. At 31, pregnant and seemingly settled, my life appeared perfect to any outsider, but beneath this veneer a starkly different reality lurked. Derek, my husband, was a master of public charm. At 38, he was the sort who drew eyes in any gathering. His laugh was infectious, his stories captivating. To the world, we were the idyllic couple, eagerly awaiting our first child. Yet behind the closed doors of our home, Derek's true colors bled through. The affection and warmth he once showered on me had turned into something colder, harsher. His words, once filled with love, now often cut deep. I had become adept at navigating his moods, a silent dance of walking on eggshells. I often found myself reminiscing about our early days, filled with joy and promise. Derek was Rock, my confidant, but marriage seemed to unravel him, revealing a controlling and often cruel man. I told myself it was the stress of his job, but deep down, I knew these were mere excuses. The sound of a key in the lock jolted me back to reality. My heart skipped a beat. Derek was home early. Standing up quickly, I adjusted my maternity dress and tried to muster a smile. "Morning, love," Derek greeted, hanging up his coat. His voice was light, but his eyes, cold and scrutinizing, quickly scanned the room. "Good morning," I replied, my voice strained. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." He shrugged nonchalantly and headed for the fridge. "Needed a break from the office. How's the little one doing?" His hand rested on my belly, a gesture that once brought joy, now only discomfort. "He's doing fine," I managed to say. "Good," he said, his gaze lingering on me. "You look tired, Clara. You should rest more." I nodded silently, knowing better than to argue. Lunch passed in an uncomfortable silence. Derek was distant, lost in his own world, while I struggled with my meal. The tension between us was like a third unwelcome guest at the table. Post-lunch, Derek disappeared into his study, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My eyes landed on a family photo on the wall, a painful reminder of the facade we upheld. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home. I knew I needed to talk to someone, but who would believe the dark side of Derek, the perfect husband, the successful businessman? I felt utterly alone. As the day wore on, a resolve began to form within me. I couldn't continue living this lie, not for myself and definitely not for my unborn child. I had to find a way out, to expose Derek for who he really was. It was a daunting task, but for the sake of my child, I was ready to do whatever it took. That night, as I lay beside him, I silently vowed to myself I would find the courage to leave, to give my child a life free from this shadow. I needed a plan, a way to reveal Derek's true nature. It was a challenging path, but for my child, I was willing to walk it. I woke up to another day under the same roof as Derek, feeling the weight of my unborn child and the heavier burden of my secret turmoil. The morning was routine. Derek left for work with a peck on the cheek, a gesture so hollow it stung. As the door closed behind him, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the freedom his absence brought. But this respite was short-lived. Today, I had decided, was the day I would begin to document Derek's true nature. It was risky, but necessary. I needed evidence, something tangible to show the world the man he really was. That evening, as Derek returned, I braced myself. His mood was a barometer for the evening ahead. He came in, his face like a thundercloud. "Evening," I greeted him cautiously. He grunted in response, tossing his keys on the table. "What's for dinner?" I had prepared his favorite, roast chicken with vegetables. I hoped it might lighten his mood. "Roast chicken. It's almost ready." He eyed the kitchen suspiciously, as if expecting a flaw. "Make sure it's not dry this time." I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. At dinner, Derek picked at his food, his frown deepening with every bite. "This is bland," he muttered, pushing his plate away. "Can't you do anything right?" I clenched my fists under the table, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'm sorry, Derek. I'll try to do better." "You always say that, but I see no improvement." His voice was laced with contempt. I wanted to scream, to tell him how his words crushed me, but I held back. Instead, I quietly cleared the table, feeling his eyes bore into me. Later that night, in the privacy of my room, I took out my phone and began to write everything down. Every harsh word, every dismissive gesture. It felt like opening a floodgate, the words pouring out of me. This diary would be my weapon, a testament to the truth. The next few days were a blur of tension and silent suffering. Derek's mood swung wildly, and I tiptoed around him, capturing every incident in my phone. His disdainful comments, his careless disregard for my well-being, I recorded it all. One evening, as we sat watching TV, Derek suddenly turned to me. "Why are you so quiet these days? You used to be more lively." I met his gaze, my heart pounding. "Just tired, I guess," he scoffed. "You're always tired. What do you even do all day?" His words were like a slap in the face, but I swallowed the hurt. "Taking care of the house and preparing for the baby," I said quietly. Derek laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Taking care of the house? Look at this place. You're barely managing." I felt a tear escape my eye, but I quickly wiped it away. This was the Derek that the world needed to see, the one hidden behind closed doors, and I was going to expose him. Each day blurred into the next, a monotonous cycle of dread and resilience. Derek's behavior worsened, his mask slipping more frequently. I continued to document every cruel word, every cold gesture, building my case against him in secret. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday, mundane in every way, until Derek stormed home early from work, his face twisted in fury. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The incompetence at work is driving me insane," he yelled, slamming his briefcase on the table. "Can't anyone do their job right?" I stepped back, feeling the walls of the room closing in. "Derek, please, you're scaring me." "Scaring you?" He scoffed. "I'm not even doing anything yet." His words sent a chill down my spine. I knew I had to be careful, to not provoke him further. But it was like walking through a minefield, blindfolded. As I tried to calm him, suggesting he relax and take a break, Derek's rage only grew. He began to hurl insults, each word a dagger aimed at my heart. I retreated to the kitchen, hoping to put some distance between us, but he followed, his anger a palpable force. "You're useless, Clara. Can't cook, can't clean. What good are you?" I stood there, my back against the counter, feeling trapped. My hand found a pair of scissors lying there, a mundane household tool, yet in that moment a lifeline. As Derek advanced, I held the scissors up defensively. Stay back, Derek, please. The look in his eyes changed then, a flicker of surprise, maybe even fear. He stopped, his rage replaced by something else. Realization, perhaps. He knew he had gone too far. What are you going to do, Clara? Stab me? His voice was a venomous hiss. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, but I won't let you hurt me. We stood there in a standoff, the tension thick in the air. Then Derek laughed, a cold, mocking sound. You're pathetic, he said, turning away. Don't think this changes anything. But it had changed something. It had shown me the depth of his cruelty and my own strength. I knew then that I had to act, to bring his true nature to light. That night, after Derek had gone to bed, I sent an email to his boss, attaching excerpts from my diary. I detailed the abuse, the fear, the reality of living with Derek. It was a risk, exposing him like this, but I had reached my breaking point. The next morning, Derek left for work as usual, unaware of the storm that was brewing. I waited, my heart pounding, for the inevitable fallout. It came in the form of a phone call from Derek's boss. He was shocked, apologetic. He had no idea, he said. He promised to handle the situation. Later that day, Derek came home, his expression one of defeat. He had been suspended from work, pending an investigation. The mask he wore so well had slipped, revealing the monster beneath to the world. As I looked at him, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, relief, a sense of justice. This was just the beginning, I knew. There would be more battles to fight, more truths to uncover. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I know what you did, Clara, Derek said, his voice low. Yes, I replied, meeting his gaze, and I'd do it again. The aftermath of my email was like a storm breaking. Derek was a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, brooding demeanor. But I knew better than to let my guard down. In the silence of our home, his resentment simmered like a cauldron on the verge of boiling over. Uncle Jack, my late father's brother and the only family I had left, was the first person I reached out to. He had always been a pillar of strength, and I knew I could trust him with the truth. Clara, I always suspected something was off, Uncle Jack said over the phone, his voice heavy with concern. Why didn't you tell me sooner? His words were kind, but they stung. I had been too ashamed, too afraid of not being believed. But now I needed him. I need your help, Uncle Jack. I can't do this alone. We'll get you out of this, Clara. You're not alone anymore, he assured me, and I felt a glimmer of hope. In the following days, I focused on my plan. I continued to document Derek's behavior, each entry more damning than the last. I also started reaching out to a few close friends, testing the waters, gauging their reactions. Some were skeptical, but most were supportive, shocked by the revelation. One evening, as Derek and I sat in an oppressive silence, he finally spoke. You've ruined my career, Clara. How could you? His words were icy, but I detected a hint of desperation beneath them. I didn't ruin anything, Derek. You did that all by yourself, I replied calmly. He glared at me, his hands clenched into fists. You think you're smart, don't you? Exposing me, turning everyone against me. I met his gaze steadily. I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm just revealing the truth. Derek laughed bitterly. And what about you, Clara? Aren't you afraid of what people will say? The perfect wife, not so perfect after all. I felt a surge of anger, but kept my voice even. I don't care what people say. I won't be a victim anymore. The days that followed were a tense cat-and-mouse game. Derek's moods were unpredictable, and I found myself constantly on edge, but I was determined to see my plan through. Uncle Jack was a constant support, calling daily, offering advice and encouragement. He also started gathering legal resources, preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. I knew the hardest part was still to come. Exposing Derek at his workplace was one thing, but the public humiliation and legal battles that lay ahead would be a true test of my resolve. But I was ready. For my sake, and for the sake of my unborn child, I was ready to fight. As I lay in bed each night, I thought about the future. A life free from Derek's shadow, a fresh start for me and my child. It was a future worth fighting for, and I was determined to make it a reality. The days leading up to the confrontation felt like a countdown to Judgment Day. Each passing hour was laced with a mix of dread and determination. Derek, now aware of his precarious situation, oscillated between sullen silence and fits of rage. Uncle Jack had been instrumental in orchestrating the next phase of my plan. He had discreetly contacted some influential people, laying the groundwork for what was to come. "We need to be strategic, Clara," he had advised. "We strike hard and fast, leaving no room for Derek to manipulate the situation." The day of reckoning arrived unceremoniously. Derek left for work, his expression grim. I knew today would be the day he would face the consequences of his actions. I spent the morning in a restless state, my mind racing with possible scenarios. Then the phone call came. It was Uncle Jack, his voice tense but determined. "It's happening, Clara. Derek's being confronted at work. They're going to suspend him pending a full investigation." A wave of relief and apprehension washed over me. "What about the evidence?" "We've got it covered. Everything you documented, the testimonies from his colleagues who witnessed his outbursts, it's all been presented." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. This was it, the beginning of the end for Derek's reign of terror. Hours later, Derek returned home. The door slammed shut with a force that made me jump. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes burning with unspoken threats. "You," he spat, pointing a finger at me. "You've destroyed me, Clara." I stood my ground, despite the fear coursing through me. "No, Derek, you did this to yourself." He advanced towards me, but I didn't flinch. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just ruin my life and walk away?" "It's not about winning, Derek. It's about the truth. About not letting you hurt me or anyone else anymore." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're nothing without me, Clara. You'll see. You'll come crawling back." But I knew I wouldn't. I had seen the depth of his cruelty, and I was done being his victim. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and preparations. Uncle Jack was by my side, guiding me through the process. The divorce proceedings were set in motion, and with each passing day I felt a little more of my old self return. The final hearing was a catharsis. As I stood before the judge, recounting the years of abuse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Derek sat there, his usual confident demeanor shattered, unable to refute the mountain of evidence against him. When the judge granted the divorce, ruling in my favor, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't a victory, but it was justice. Derek had lost his job, his reputation, and now his marriage. The fall of his tyranny was complete. As I walked out of the courtroom, a free woman, I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I had stood up to Derek, exposed him for who he truly was, and I had survived. I was ready to start anew, to build a better life for myself and my child, a life free from fear, free from Derek. The seeds of retribution had been sown, and they had borne fruit. The courtroom doors closed behind me, sealing away a chapter of my life that had been marked by fear and subjugation. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt its warmth as a symbol of the new beginning that lay ahead. Uncle Jack, ever my steadfast supporter, was waiting for me outside. "You did it, Clara," he said, his eyes glistening with unspoken pride. "I did," I replied, the reality of my newfound freedom slowly sinking in. "But I couldn't have done it without you." "We're family," he said, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. "Now let's focus on the future." The days that followed were a blend of relief and rebuilding. The divorce had granted me a significant portion of our shared assets, and Derek was ordered to pay alimony. It was more than just financial security. It was a means to start anew, to provide for my child without the shadow of Derek looming over us. I found a small, cozy apartment in a friendly neighborhood. It was the perfect place to turn into a home, a sanctuary for me and my baby. As I set up the nursery, I felt a surge of excitement, a joy that had been absent for far too long. Uncle Jack was a frequent visitor, helping with the preparations and sharing in my newfound happiness. "You're going to be a great mother," he would say, and I started to believe it. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of books, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek. My heart skipped a beat as I read his words. "You'll regret this. You've not seen the last of me." I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of anger mixed with a pang of fear. But then something within me shifted. I was no longer the scared, submissive woman Derek had known. I was stronger now, emboldened by my struggles and triumphs. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "You no longer have any power over me, Derek. It's over." Sending the message felt like shedding the last remnant of my old life. Derek had lost his grip on me, and I knew that any threats he made were the last gasps of a defeated man. The next few months passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. The community around me was supportive, and I made new friends, fellow mothers who shared in my excitement and offered their wisdom. Then the day arrived. The birth of my child, a beautiful baby girl, was the culmination of all my hopes and dreams. Holding her in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and protection. As I looked into her eyes, I made a silent promise. I would give her the life she deserved, full of love, happiness, and freedom. A life so starkly different from the one I had endured. In the end, the dawn of liberation was not just about freeing myself from Derek. It was about breaking the cycle, about building a future where my daughter could thrive, unburdened by the shadows of the past. And in that future, I saw not just survival, but the promise of joy and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Life with my daughter, Lily, brought a sense of fulfillment I had never known. Each day with her was a gift, a reminder of the new path I had forged for us. She was my little beacon of hope, her laughter and bright eyes a constant source of joy. Uncle Jack was a regular presence in our lives, doting on Lily as if she were his own granddaughter. "She's going to grow up strong, just like her mother," he would say with a twinkle in his eye. As for Derek, he became a distant memory, a dark chapter in my life that had been firmly closed. The last I heard, he had moved away, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. The community that once admired him now knew the truth, and he had lost the respect he so dearly valued. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I would reflect on my journey. The pain and suffering I had endured at Derek's hands had been a crucible, forging me into a stronger, more resilient woman. I had faced my fears, stood up to my oppressor, and come out victorious. But my story was more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of hope and the strength of the human spirit. It was a message to anyone suffering in silence, afraid and alone, that change was possible, that they too could break free and reclaim their lives. One evening, as I put Lily to bed, I looked down at her peaceful face and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had fought for this, for her right to grow up in a world free of fear and full of love. As I left her room, the soft glow of the nightlight casting a gentle aura around her, I paused at the doorway. The future was unwritten, a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of our lives. There would be challenges, no doubt, but I was ready to face them head-on. With Lily by my side and the support of Uncle Jack and my new friends, I felt unstoppable. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I was Clara, a survivor, a mother, a woman reborn. As I sat down in the living room, a sense of peace settled over me. The struggles I had faced had led me to this moment, to a life filled with promise and possibility. Tomorrow was a new day, and it was ours to embrace. And in that promise of tomorrow, I found not just an end, but a beautiful beginning. "Why are you still in bed, Claire? Do something useful for once." Jared's voice cut through the morning quiet like a hammer striking metal. I groaned and turned over. "I'm on doctor's orders to rest, Jared. I just made breakfast for us." Again with the excuses, he snapped. "Pancakes again? I wanted omelets today. Where's your respect for my preferences?" "You never mentioned wanting omelets. It doesn't matter. I'm going to the diner. Eat your pathetic pancakes alone." I heard the door slam behind him as he stormed out. I sat up, rubbing my temples. My back ached, and my belly felt heavy with the weight of our unborn child. His words lingered, sharp and biting. Breakfast had always been simple. It was one of the few things I still enjoyed before the day's chaos began. It wasn't always like this. When I first told Jared about the pregnancy, he was over the moon, buying baby clothes and painting the nursery. But somewhere along the line, his excitement wilted, replaced by disdain and indifference. I pushed myself up from the bed and shuffled to the kitchen, looking at the plate of pancakes cooling on the counter. Picking up a fork, I half-heartedly nibbled on one, the taste bland and empty. My phone buzzed next to the plate, and I saw a new message from Megan, Jared's sister. "How are you holding up?" she had written. I hesitated before typing back. "Managing. Jared's being difficult again." Her reply was swift. "I'm coming over later. We need to talk." A sense of relief washed over me. Though Jared might be behaving like a different person, Megan had always been supportive. I carried my breakfast to the living room and plopped down on the couch. Reaching for the remote, I turned on the TV for company, something to drown out the silence of the empty house. An infomercial droned on about weight loss supplements, but my mind drifted, recollecting the last few months. Jared's erratic behavior, his late nights without explanation, and how he'd become a stranger sharing my home. When had things gotten so bad? 2 hours passed, and there was a knock at the door. Megan stepped in, her eyes scanning the room with concern. "Hey," she said, sitting down beside me. "What's going on?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my situation pressing down on me. He's getting more intolerable every day. Everything I do is wrong. I can't keep up with his demands. Megan's jaw tightened. "I'm worried about you. You don't deserve this. Have you thought about what you're going to do?" I placed my hand on my belly, feeling a slight flutter from the baby. I have to think about her now. I can't take much more of this. Megan nodded, her expression serious. "You know I'll help you in any way I can, right?" "Thank you, Megan. I don't know what I'd do without you." Just then, the front door swung open and Jared walked in, looking annoyed to see Megan there. "So, what's this little meeting about?" he scoffed. "Nothing you'd care about, Jared," Megan shot back. Jared glared at her, then turned to me. "And you, are you going to sit around all day, or will you finally do something useful?" I felt a surge of determination I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm already doing something useful by taking care of our child and myself. If you can't respect that, then maybe you should reconsider your priorities." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he grabbed his keys and walked out again, leaving behind a tense silence. Megan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Claire. Just remember that." I nodded, feeling a little bit of that strength seeping in. This was just the beginning, but I knew I had to start standing up for myself and my baby. The breaking point was here, and with it, a chance to take back my life. "You're not coming in with me?" I asked, glancing at Jared as we parked at the doctor's office. He shook his head, barely looking up from his phone. "I've got calls to make. You'll be fine on your own." I sighed and stepped out of the car, my hand instinctively resting on my growing belly. Inside the clinic, the nurse greeted me warmly and led me to the examination room. Minutes later, Dr. Patel entered, her smile reassuring. "How are we feeling today, Claire?" she asked, checking my chart. I forced a smile. "A bit tired, but otherwise okay." "We'll do an ultrasound today, see how the little one is doing," she said, prepping the equipment. As the image of our baby appeared on the screen, I felt a rush of emotions, excitement, worry, and a flicker of hope that maybe seeing this would reignite some semblance of care in Jared. "It's a girl," Dr. Patel announced, beaming. "Congratulations, Claire." A girl. My heart swelled with love and fear for my daughter's future. Would Jared be happy? I thanked Dr. Patel and collected the photos of the ultrasound. On the drive back, I couldn't wait to share the news with Jared. Maybe this would change things. "Jared, guess what?" I said, sliding into the car and waving the photos. "We're having a girl." His expression didn't change. He glanced at the photos and then back at the road. "A girl? Great." My heart sank. "You don't seem excited." Jared shrugged. "I was hoping for a son, to carry on the family name, teach him things." I stared at him, stunned by his apathy. "Does it matter? She's our child." "Whatever," he muttered. "Can we just get home?" The drive was silent, each mile deepening the rift between us. Back at the house, I carefully placed the ultrasound photos on the fridge, but Jared didn't even glance at them. Later that evening, I set the table for dinner, trying to push aside the nagging feeling of disappointment. Jared was glued to his laptop, barely acknowledging my presence. "Come eat, Jared," I called out, trying to keep my tone light. He grunted, not moving an inch. "I'm busy." The meal remained untouched, and I ate alone, the chair opposite me glaringly empty. Just as I was about to clear the dishes, Jared finally spoke. "You need to understand, Claire," he said, not looking up. "This baby thing isn't what I signed up for. Not like this." "Not like this?" I echoed, anger and hurt bubbling up. "What do you mean, Jared?" "I wanted a son. Someone who could, never mind." He shut his laptop with a snap and stood up. "I'm going out. Don't wait up." The door slammed shut, and I was left in the emptiness of the house, feeling more alone than ever. I touched the ultrasound photo on the fridge, tracing the tiny outline of our daughter. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the house silent except for the occasional car passing by. I realized that Jared was slipping further away with each passing day. His disappointment in having a daughter was just another crack in our already fractured relationship. I couldn't let this continue. For my own sake, and for my daughter's future, I would have to find a way to protect her, even if it meant confronting the harsh realities of our marriage. Determination replaced the despair as I resolved to find a way forward, no matter what it took. I was setting up for a family barbecue when Jared walked in, looking disheveled. I glanced up from the skewers I was preparing. "You're home early." "Yeah, about that." He scratched his head, avoiding my eyes. "I quit my job." My heart skipped a beat. The irony was sharp. Here we were celebrating family, while ours was crumbling. "You what?" "I couldn't take it anymore," he said, shrugging. "I'll find something better." "Pretending everything's fine won't put food on the table, Jared. What about our expenses? The baby?" "I said I'll find something better, Claire. Just get off my back," he snapped. Megan and her boyfriend arrived moments later, filling the room with forced cheer. I put on my best smile and directed everyone outside. As we settled into the backyard, I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Megan's boyfriend, Dave, handed me a glass of lemonade. "You okay? You seem a bit off." "I'm fine," I lied, my eyes darting to Jared, who was already nursing his third beer in silence. Megan caught my glance and pulled me aside. "What's going on?" "He quit his job." Her eyes widened. "Without discussing it? What's his plan?" "He doesn't have one," I whispered, trying to control my frustration. I'm stuck." "Listen," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You and the baby come first. You can't let him drag you down." I nodded, her words echoing in my mind. While back at the table, Jared was ranting to Dave about former colleagues, oblivious to the tension between Megan and me. "Those idiots didn't appreciate my talents," he slurred. "I'll show them. They'll regret it." Dave glanced at me, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, I'm sure things will work out." After the guests left, Jared stumbled into the house. I cleaned up the mess, the day's events swirling in my mind. Would this new version of Jared ever go back to who he was? As I loaded the last dish into the dishwasher, the front door opened and Jared lurched in. "I'm tired," he muttered, heading to the bedroom. I finished cleaning up and followed, the silence between us thicker than ever. He was already snoring when I crawled into bed, my mind racing with worry about our future. The next few weeks were a blur of Jared's increasing absences and my solo trips to the grocery store, juggling our shrinking finances. One evening, he came back home later than usual, disheveled and visibly agitated. "Where have you been, Jared?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Out," he said, brushing past me. "You can't just leave without saying anything. We need to talk." "Talk? There's nothing to talk about." I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. "We're having a baby soon? Did you forget?" He scoffed. "You worry about that. I'm tired of this conversation." His words cut deep. As he stomped off to the bedroom, I sat in the living room, the baby kicking inside me. I realized I couldn't rely on him anymore. I would have to be the strong one for our child's sake, even if it meant facing this journey alone. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter in Jared's sloppy handwriting. "Gone to clear my head. Don't wait up." I crumpled the paper, feeling an anger I'd never known before. His irresponsibility was no longer just frustrating, it was endangering our future. I picked up the phone and called Megan. "I need help. Jared's gone again." She sighed on the other end. "I'm coming over. We need to make a plan." I hung up, determination solidifying in my chest. This had to end. For my baby. For me. The once sparkling promise of our future together had dimmed to a cold, harsh reality. I wasn't going to let him destroy what I had left. I sat on Megan's couch, cradling a cup of tea. She looked at me with concern. "You're not alone in this, Claire. We'll figure it out." "Thanks, Megan. I don't know how much more I can take." Megan's eyes softened. "I've been meaning to tell you something. Jared has always struggled with responsibility. Even growing up, he was always in trouble, always the one making excuses." "And I thought it was just a phase," I replied, feeling the weight of her words. "But this is different. We're about to have a baby. He quit his job without even talking to me." Megan sighed. "It's worse than you know. He's been gambling, Claire. He lost a lot of money last week." My heart sank. "Gambling? Why didn't he tell me?" "He's too proud to admit he's failing, and he's been hiding things from you, things you deserve to know." I put down my cup, feeling a surge of anger. I'm tired of his lies. I need to start preparing for the baby and stop focusing on him. Megan nodded. You're right. We need to find a way to secure your future. Have you thought about opening a separate bank account? I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I'll do that, and I need to talk to a lawyer. We can find someone good, Megan assured me. Meanwhile, you should stay with us. It's safer. I hesitated, then agreed. Okay, just for a while. The next day, I visited a lawyer, Sarah Johnson, who came highly recommended by Megan. Sitting in her office, I recounted the events of the past few months. Sarah listened intently. You have options, Claire. First, we can protect your assets. Second, we need to document everything. Keep a record of his absences, his erratic behavior, everything. Can we get full custody? I asked, my voice trembling. We can fight for it, Sarah assured me. But you must be prepared. Jared will likely contest it. I'm ready, I said, feeling a newfound resolve. After leaving Sarah's office, I headed back to Megan's apartment. Jared's car was parked outside. Unexpected. My pulse quickened as I reached door. Inside, Jared was pacing, Megan standing nearby, looking tense. What's going on? I asked, stepping in. Jared whirled around, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. Where the hell have you been, Claire? I met with a lawyer, I said, standing my ground. A lawyer? He scoffed, eyes narrowing. What are you planning, Claire? I'm planning to protect our daughter, I replied, my voice steady. And myself. You're not taking her away from me, he growled, stepping forward. Megan stepped between us. Back off, Jared. This is on you. He laughed bitterly. Of course you'd side with her. You never supported me. Because you never gave me a reason to, Megan shot back. Claire's doing what's best for her and the baby. Maybe you should start thinking about that. Jared's face turned crimson, but he didn't say another word. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I turned to Megan, my heart pounding. Thank you. You did great, she said, pulling me into a hug. We'll get through this. Jared's outburst only solidified my resolve. I wasn't backing down. For my daughter and for myself, I was ready to fight. No more letting Jared's actions dictate our lives. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I felt stronger knowing I had Megan and Sarah by my side. The storm was far from over, but I was more determined than ever to come out stronger on the other side. I sat in the quiet of Megan's apartment, feeling the growing emptiness of our old home. My phone buzzed, an incoming call from Megan. Claire, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? Sure. Is everything okay? Just come over. It's important. I hung up, feeling a knot in my stomach. Something was wrong. I rushed to Megan's place, my fears intensifying with every step. When I arrived, Megan's worried expression met me at the door. Come in, Claire, she said, her voice low. I followed her to the living room, where she handed me her phone, displaying a series of photos. Jared and a young woman, their intimacy unmistakable. My heart plummeted. Who is she? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Her name's Lena, Megan replied, her eyes filled with sympathy. I caught them together. The photos felt like a punch to the gut. I can't believe this, I said, my voice trembling. He's been betraying us all along. Megan put a comforting hand on my arm. You should confront him. You deserve to know the truth. I nodded, wiping away angry tears. I will. Later that evening, Jared burst in through the doorway, reeking of alcohol and smugness. Had a good day? He sneered, his expression indifferent as usual. Who's Lena, Jared? I asked, unable to hold back. He froze, then laughed mockingly. Does it even matter? Our marriage has been over for a long time, Claire. You've been cheating on me while I carry your child? My voice broke, anger mingled with heartbreak. Look, Claire, he said, his tone cold. I want a divorce. Lena and I are moving on. I'll give you some money, but that's it. You and the kid can fend for yourselves. You're a coward, I said, stepping closer, my voice more confident than I felt. If you want a divorce, fine, but I'm not taking any of your scraps. I'm taking you to court. Jared's eyes widened momentarily, then he scoffed. Good luck with that. I'll see to it that you get nothing. He turned and walked out, leaving me to collapse onto the couch, overwhelmed by the reality of his betrayal. But amidst the sorrow, a fierce determination took root. I wasn't going to let him destroy our lives. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah's number. Sarah, it's Claire. I need to file for divorce. Jared's been cheating, and he's demanding a pittance to start a new life with his affair partner. Get all the evidence you can, Claire, Sarah responded firmly. We'll fight him every step of the way. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. Megan sat beside me, her presence grounding. You did the right thing, Claire. You will come out of this stronger. The days following were a whirlwind. Collecting evidence, meeting with Sarah, and preparing for the impending battle. Jared's arrogance fueled my resolve. He continued his charade, believing he would walk away unscathed. But I had different plans. Megan and I worked tirelessly, documenting Jared's every move. When the day came to face him in court, I felt ready. Jared was vile, but I had found a strength within me I hadn't known existed. As we stood in the courtroom, I glanced at Megan and Sarah, their supportive nods, a testament to our solidarity. Jared's smug demeanor faltered as the evidence stacked against him. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. I tightened my grip on the stack of documents in my hand, feeling the weight of justice on my side. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring a future for my daughter. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for everything we deserved. Sarah's office was bustling with activity when I arrived. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a reassuring smile. Claire, we're ready to go over the strategy. Are you prepared? Yes, I replied, my eyes meeting hers. Let's do this. We sat down at the conference table, papers spread out in front of us. Sarah laid out the plan meticulously, documenting Jared's neglect, his affair, and his financial irresponsibility. We have a strong case, she said confidently. Our goal is full custody and a substantial alimony. Jared won't know what hit him. I nodded, feeling bolstered by her confidence. We reviewed the evidence once more. Photos of Jared and Lena, his erratic financial records, and affidavits from Megan and others who had witnessed his behavior. This wasn't just a fight. It was a battle for justice. The day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse loomed large as I walked in, feeling the weight of what was to come. Jared was already there, looking more polished than usual, but his eyes held a nervous edge. We filed into the courtroom, the judge presiding with an air of stern authority. Jared's lawyer began, trying to paint a picture of a struggling man who deserved leniency. Your Honor, Sarah's voice cut through the room. The evidence is clear. Jared Harper has been negligent, unfaithful, and financially irresponsible. We are requesting full custody of Claire's daughter and appropriate alimony to support her as she prepares for her new life. Jared's lawyer scoffed. Mr. Harper is a dedicated father. He deserves joint custody and is willing to provide some alimony. Sarah stood firm. Dedicated? Really? Let's go over the facts. Jared has been absent for a significant part of the pregnancy, spending time and money on extramarital affairs. He quit his job with no notice and has not contributed adequately to household expenses. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jared shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Harper, would you like to speak? I stood, hands trembling but voice steady. Your Honor, I've worked hard to keep our family together, but I can't do it alone anymore. My husband has shown time and again that he isn't committed to this family. I want to provide a stable, loving home for my daughter. Jared shot me a glare. Lies! She's turning everyone against me. The judge silenced him with a look. Mr. Harper, you'll have your turn. We presented our evidence. Jared's cell phone records, bank statements, and photos of him with Lena. Megan's testimony was heartfelt, painting a picture of a man who had lost his way and a sister-in-law who was trying to pick up the pieces. Jared's lawyer tried to counter, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's expression grew stern as the facts piled up. After hours of testimonies and cross-examinations, the judge took a brief recess. When she returned, her decision was swift and clear. Mrs. Harper, you are granted full custody of your daughter. Mr. Harper, you will provide adequate alimony and child support. Jared's face went white. This isn't fair, he shouted, but no one paid him any mind. The judge's gavel slammed down. Court is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Claire? Justice is on your side. I glanced back at Jared, his face twisted with anger and fear. He had thought he could get away with everything, but now he faced the consequences of his actions. Megan hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you. You stood up for yourself and for your daughter. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were tears of relief. Thank you, Megan. I couldn't have done it without you. We walked out of the courthouse, the sun shining brightly. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while I felt hopeful. My daughter and I would start anew, leaving the past behind. Jared's downfall was just beginning, but my journey to rebuilding my life had already begun. Jared's face was plastered all over the papers. Local man exposed, infidelity and financial failure lead to downfall. My phone buzzed non-stop with notifications and messages, some from mutual friends, others from strangers who had picked up on our story. Megan sat beside me, shaking her head. He brought this on himself. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. It was Sarah. Just came from the judge's chambers. Jared's demands for reduced alimony have been denied. He's in deep debt, Claire. I never wished for this, but he has to face the consequences. Sarah nodded. And his legal troubles are only beginning. His part-time jobs found out about the court ruling and fired him. He's practically blacklisted. Employers don't take kindly to public shaming. Just then, my phone rang. Jared's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, but Sarah encouraged me to answer. What do you want, Jared? His voice was laced with desperation. Claire, please. The media is killing me. I've lost everything. Can't we talk this through? I could almost hear the pleading in his voice. You made your choices. This is your consequence. Please, Claire. I can't find work. Lena left me. I need help. Megan and I will discuss this with Sarah, I said, looking at Sarah for confirmation. But I can't promise anything. You need to understand the gravity of what you've done. I understand. Thank you, he croaked before the line went dead. Megan gave me a skeptical look. Are you sure about this? He's at rock bottom. Maybe now he'll learn. Later that evening, Megan and I met with Sarah at her apartment. We reviewed Jared's desperate request. Let's keep a record of this conversation, Sarah said, setting her phone to record. Then she dialed Jared. Jared, it's Sarah. We're willing to listen, but you need to be honest. Jared's voice trembled through the speaker. I am. I'm trying to turn things around. Turnaround starts with responsibility, Sarah said sternly. Admit to your errors, find solutions, and we might consider adjusting the stipulations. I'll do whatever it takes, Jared replied hastily. Then get clean, Megan added. No more gambling, no more lies. Show us you can be reliable. I will, I promise, he said, sounding like a man clutching his last hope. The next few weeks were revealing. Jared struggled to find even odd jobs. Megan and I occasionally spotted him around town, looking disheveled and downtrodden. His proclamations of reform were met with skepticism by those who knew his past. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a new message. Jared's text read, I've enrolled in a gambling support group. First session today. I showed Megan the message. Think he means it? We'll see. Actions speak louder than words. Jared's actions began to show promise. He attended support group meetings regularly and even picked up volunteer work at a community center. Sarah kept track, cautiously optimistic. He's making an effort, she said during one of our meetups, but it's a long road. A month later, Jared requested a face-to-face meeting. With Sarah's guidance, we agreed, but kept it public at a nearby cafe. As he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked more composed, yet there was still a shadow of his old self. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sitting down. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Jared? Sarah asked, keeping the conversation on track. I need to apologize. I was wrong about everything. I want you to see I'm trying to change for the better, especially for our daughter, he said, his eyes earnest for once. I nodded. Prove it, Jared. Words aren't enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn sobriety chip. 1 month clean. Small steps, but I'm committed. Megan gave me a reassuring nod. We'll keep an eye on you. Don't slip. The meeting ended with a sense of cautious hope. Jared had a long way to regain trust, but the first steps had been taken. For me and my daughter, a new chapter waited, filled with healing and cautious optimism. I sat at Megan's dining table, sorting through the stack of documents Sarah had prepared. The custody papers were finalized, and I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Mommy, my little girl Hannah, toddled over, tugging at my shirt. Her innocent eyes were a beacon of hope in the midst of our turbulent life. I scooped her up, planting a kiss on her forehead. Hey, sweetie, Mommy's almost done. Go play with Aunt Megan for a while. Megan led Hannah to the living room, setting her down with a pile of toys. She's growing up so fast. She is, I said, feeling the bittersweet nature of our situation. Just then my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I've got the restraining order paperwork ready. We need your signature. I placed the phone down and sighed. As much as Jared's recent efforts to change were promising, I couldn't take any chances with Hannah's safety. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, her expression serious. Claire, we need to talk. Jared's been making some disturbing comments in his support group. I frowned, letting her in. What kind of comments? Sarah glanced around, ensuring Hannah was out of earshot. He said if he couldn't have custody, he'd take drastic measures. We need to act fast. Fear rippled through me. Do you think he'd try to take her? We can't rule it out. We need to ensure you and Hannah are safe. As we discussed the plan, another knock sounded. I opened the door cautiously to see Jared standing there, looking agitated. I need to see Hannah, he demanded. You can't just show up unannounced, Jared, I said, blocking his view of the inside. I'm her father, he growled. I have rights. Not without proper arrangements, Sarah said, stepping forward. Leave now, or I'll call the police. Jared's eyes flashed with anger, but he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Stay alert, Claire, Sarah warned. He's unpredictable. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. Around midnight, the sound of a window creaking open set my heart racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. A figure appeared in the hallway. Jared. I just want to see her, he whispered harshly. Get out now, Jared, I yelled, clutching Hannah close to me. Within minutes, the police arrived. Officer Mark Anderson, the responding officer, assessed the situation quickly. Mr. Harper, you're under arrest for violating the restraining order. Jared struggled as they cuffed him, shouting, I just wanted to see my daughter. As they led him away, Hannah stirred in my arms, her innocent eyes opening briefly. The sight of the police lights outside startled her, and she began to cry softly. Megan rushed in, wrapping us both in her arms. It's over, Claire. He can't hurt you anymore. The next morning, Sarah came by with the final documentation for the restraining order. This ensures he can't come near you or Hannah. If he tries anything again, there will be severe consequences. I signed the papers with a shaking hand, but a sense of finality and relief washed over me. Megan set down a plate of breakfast in front of me. Here's to new beginnings. You and Hannah deserve peace. I smiled, looking at my daughter now playing with her toys, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. Thank you, Megan, for everything. Always, she said, squeezing my shoulder. That evening, Megan and I sat together, reflecting on the past few months. It's been a tough journey, she said, but look how far you've come. I couldn't have done it alone, and now it's a fresh start for us. Looking at Hannah, peacefully sleeping, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Jared's toxicity was no longer a shadow over our lives. With the legal battles behind us, it was time to rebuild and move forward, fostering a life of love and safety for my daughter. Finally, we were free to create our future, unburdened by the past.